The annual award ceremony for the young essays is the highlight, if you will, is my personal highlight, I think, of the Gallen Symposium, because this is here where we hear from the next generation their visions, their ambitions, their hopes, and where we really have the dialogue about their most difficult views on the future of the planet, and where we in this audience are truly forced to listen. Because let's face it, our ambitions and hopes and dreams rest on their very young shoulders. The symposium receives hundreds of essays from around the world, and when you'll hear that there are truly global perspectives. And from those submissions, it selects the leaders of tomorrow who come and join us at the symposium each year. We're going to hear from the three most outstanding essayists and award the prizes in ascending order: third place, second place, first place. And in order to do the honors, and he's just told me he's done this 15 times in a row, I want to welcome back to the stage, my good friend Riz Khan. And there's a little lesson in here for this next generation, because Riz and I worked together 20 plus years ago. And that doesn't age us, because frankly, we're the same age, right, Riz? Yes, right. So I worked for him when he had his long-running show on CNN, Riz Khan's Q&A with Riz Khan. But that's all to say to the next generation, you will, with utmost certainty, always meet twice in life. And if you're lucky, you get to re-meet a man like Riz Khan. So let's bring to the stage Riz Khan. Thanks very much.
Everyone, it's wonderful to be back in St. Gallen. Wonderful to see it back, the symposium back in full strength. I was here last year. By the way, I'm trying to be eco-friendly now and not print off stuff, which is a challenge at my age with my eyesight. And if anyone tells me you're burning battery and that's not eco-friendly, then please stop, because I don't know what else to do. My memory's not getting better. So anyway, great to see you all back. 15 years, it's been amazing. I came here kind of almost as an experiment. My team were like, "You're going to St. Gallen? What is it?" And of course, now, if I arrive at the airport and say I'm going to St. Gallen, it's like instant. They stamp it so fast, it's like, go. Even the pandemic wasn't able to quench the amazing power and energy of this symposium, and it's responsible largely to the people who do it. It's great, because I've watched students come and go over the years. And it's so nice, many of them come back, obviously, even when they've long left the symposium and the committees and so on. And so it's really nice to catch up with everyone. And many of them are in top jobs now. And I thought I should give a little bit of advice, for those now looking to go into work, because I came across a couple of interesting stories of students in the USA who were going off to employment. And one of them was being interviewed. And the interviewer said to him, "You shouldn't do this, by the way." He said, "What's your greatest strength?" Sorry, what's your greatest weakness? He said, "What's your greatest weakness?" And the student said, I'm too honest." And the interviewer said, "Well, I don't think honesty is a weakness." He said, "I don't give a what you think." And then one young man was actually going in and was asked the same question, "What's your greatest weakness?" And he said, I'm obsessed with comic book heroes and superheroes." He said, "So then what's your greatest strength?" He said, "I'm Batman." Anyway, when I was 30 years old, I was proud of the fact that I ended up with a TV show on CNN. And it was such a delight to see Catherine, up here, because we hadn't seen each other for so long. And, I remember the marketing guys telling us, "You have a reach of 450 million households." That's over 2 billion people, So we have that kind of reach. But, the interesting thing about that time was I had the benefit of a big brand behind me, CNN, and we knew CNN had that reach, but we didn't really know who was watching. Apart from bumping into odd people here and there who said, "Oh, I watch your show," we had no idea. So it was a lot of guesswork. So let's spool forward a quarter of a century or so, and everything, and I mean everything, has changed. Our guest speaker for this session is 30 years old. as I was there proud at 30, you know, with my CNN show. But he's got a very clear idea of who's watching. I mean, the metrics that are available now are so accurate and so advanced. So he doesn't have to say, oh, I've got a few million watching or whatever. He can actually prove that his audience, his followers, are in the tens of millions. He'll update you on the latest, because you know how it changes every day. And his views are in the billions. You know, it's quite amazing when you think about that. So he jokes that I'm the old media, and how it's pretty much dead. And to a large degree, I have to agree. You know, the new media has taken over in such an amazing way. What's amazing, though, is how he's built this incredible brand on social media in a relatively short time, and has a massive following. So I'm very proud to be able to invite up to stage the founder and CEO of NASA Academy, Nussair Yassin.
Thank you, man. Thank you so much. All right. Thank you, Riz, Mr. Old Media. I appreciate the introduction. Guys, nice to meet you. Before I begin, just a couple of minutes, I want to know who's here. So if you don't mind, just like raise your hand, just tell me what country you're from and how old are you? Okay, let's go. Stand up, scream.
Philippines, 26.
26 Philippines, let's go, raise your hand, come on.
Indonesia!
What's that?
Indonesia!
How am I, how old?
26. I'm your big fan.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next. Mexico, 23, okay. Any old people want to take a stab at this?
Riz Khan, 60.
60, okay, there we go. Who stood up there?
Argentina. Germany, 21.
30, 21, okay, who's the oldest? 60, nice.
Switzerland, 73.
There we go. Okay, on that, I'm gonna begin my session. Okay, guys, I'm gonna introduce myself real quick for 5-7 minutes. Then I'm gonna tell you a little bit about what I learned over the last 6 years, okay? My name is No Sire. It's complicated. Yes, sire, no sire. Yes, sire, no sire. Complicated name. I was born and raised in Israel as a Palestinian. Complicated. No, it's complicated. I escaped after 20 years and I went to study at St. Gallen of America. It's called Harvard. I graduated, I became a software engineer, I worked at PayPal as a software engineer, and that's when the problems started to happen. You know, back then I was 24 years old. And in my community they say, if you are 1 year older, you're 100 years wiser. My Arab community. And I'm like, what the hell does that mean? And the problem with that is that when you're 24, you're not wise. Because whoever is 25 years old, they're 100 years wiser than you. And their word matters more than your word. And so that frustrated me. That is not fair. I was 24 with a Harvard degree, but a 26-year-old back in my village had more say and more wisdom. The other thing that frustrated me was corporate world, the career world. You want to be promoted? Wait 2 years. You want to be a head of whatever? Wait 5 years. You want to retire? Wait 40 years. I was like, what the hell is going on in this world? Why do you have to spend 40 years to matter? That made no sense. And so back then, I asked myself, well, okay, everybody says I'm young, but when am I going to die? And turns out there are two people that know when you're about to die. God and Google. So you type on Google, life expectancy, male, United States, 76. Sorry, man. Back then, I was 24. 24 out of 76, I realized I was 32% done with life. I was 1/3 dead. And I was like, I'm not young, I'm 1/3 dead. And I'm not gonna wait until I'm 80% dead to be, no, I'm gonna make some enemies today, okay? Something has to change in this world. And so that's when I decided to take control of my own destiny and not have to wait for society to give me the chance. I quit my job, I quit America, and I started making videos. And the videos were very simple, they're very short, 1 minute. I went around the world and I found the most interesting people and the most interesting places. And I just made videos about them. And I put that video on Facebook, on YouTube, on TikTok, on Instagram, whatever. At the beginning, nobody watched. It was just me, my mom, and my dad. Then after 50 videos, it was me, my mom, my dad, and my cousin. Then me, my mom, my dad, my cousin, and my friend. Me, my mom, and dad, my cousin, my friend's friend. And all of a sudden, from friend to friend to friend to friend, it reached 50 million people that follow the videos called Nas Daily. And I'm assuming some of them are in this. It reached you, the Indonesia person. Yes. And that was the biggest surprise of my life. That you're young, yet you can reach more people than established organizations. And so today I want to share with you what I noticed from this experience. Because when you can reach people in the millions, you kind of see the world. You can see people in Nigeria commenting. You can see people in America commenting. You have a nice bird's eye view of the world. And this bird's eye view, I saw a crazy divide between the young and the old. And I see it today. Every day I see this divide between the young and the old. So when they asked me to come and speak about this intergenerational contract, I was like, yeah, I got a couple of things I want to say. The first thing I want to say is that the young and the old people speak completely different languages. It's insane. They don't speak the same language at all. The young people today speak in emojis. Cry, thank you, happy, laugh, and that's it. Emojis is their mode of communication. While the old people of today speak in such complicated words, I don't understand. The intercontinental divide between the US and Russia has resulted in nobody understands. And I have to say, it happens here. It happens in this conference. I told you. And this is the problem. Somebody is speaking too complicated. Another person is speaking too simple. And so one of the main reasons Nas Daily worked is because I speak slow. It's because I don't use complicated words. And that has proven to be incredibly effective. You could reach people who don't speak English, and you could reach people who studied at Harvard or St. Gallen at the same time. And I think if you want to bridge the divide between generations, you need to unlearn the language that you speak. You have to unlearn English and learn a simplified one. That's the first thing I noticed. The second thing I noticed is everything is dying. Text is dying. Images are dying. If you type text right now and put it on Facebook, it will not go viral. It will not reach people. I have bad news to the cameraman. That camera is dying. That camera is too big. That camera there is too big. Nobody is going to watch this video. Right now, this video, nobody's going to watch. It's landscape. It's too long. And it goes probably on TV, which also, by the way, is dead. So is CNN. So is BBC. So is Al Jazeera, the deadest of them all. The truth of the matter is, and I'm not saying this in the form of arrogance, not at all. It's that attention is going to social media while money is still stuck in broadcast. There are billions of dollars that cater to broadcast media that are purely wasted. And they need to move to independent content creators on social media because that is much more effective. And old people and young people need to start consuming the same type of media. The reason there is such a divide between young and old is that the young is spending 20 hours on TikTok and the old is spending 20 hours on Financial Times. Somebody needs to create a media that sits somewhere in the middle, and somebody needs to fund it. And last but not least, the third thing I noticed, and this is kind of cheeky, don't hate me, I promise, don't hate me, is that we don't even dress the same. We don't dress the same. The young and the old it's such a dividing gap. There is nothing natural about putting a rope around your neck. There is nothing natural about a tie. So why do we have to dress up in a tie? So the way the old people dress is completely different from the way the young people dress, and that just furthers the divide between those two groups of people. So if you want to write an intergenerational contract, well, you got to make sure people speak the same language and watch the same content and get the same flow of information. And today, it is not happening. It is absolutely not happening. So, I don't want to take too long. To summarize, over the last 5 years, there's been a revolution happening, and nobody realizes how fast this revolution is. Nas Daily started 6 years ago. TikTok became big 3 years ago. The BBC is 200 years old. In the next 6 years, there's going to be some crazy revolutions, and I think a lot of people are going to lose a lot of money, but also the divide is going to grow between the young and the old. We're not going to even be able to speak to each other because media is going to change so much. So my hope is that if we want to actually do something useful in this world, we have to get on the same page. And we're not doing that yet. We got to get on the same page, speak the same language, have the same beliefs, agree on the same contract first, and then design policies second. But first, we have to be in the same room. And this is why I'm so happy to be here, because you guys are all in the same room. The 26 and the 73 and the 60 and the 19, it's incredible. So thank you guys so much for listening to me. I really appreciate it.
Young man, your hypothesizing about the complexity of language being inherently divisive is completely wrong.
That's good.
Teach me to TikTok, can you?
But it's not that. I don't do this. That's the thing.
I'm joking. No, listen, it's amazing, and well done. Another round of applause, please. Nusayr. You raised a very valid point. There needs to be a change. Talk a little bit about the NAS Academy.
Yeah, so...
I'm going to take my tie off, by the way.
Actually, good. It's not natural. So, we talked about media changing and communication changing. Of course, the next thing that's going to be completely changing is education. Why the hell do you need a building to learn something? You don't need a table. You don't need a chair. You don't need administration. You don't need anything. You actually just need a charismatic teacher. And that's it. So actually, you can rebuild. Yeah, I like that. So with NAS Daily, we're trying to make new media, but with NAS Academy, we're trying to enable anybody to become their own university. Anybody should be able to teach and monetize it and make money from it. You don't have, again, to get certified by the government. You don't have to be admitted to St. Gallen or Harvard, whatever. You just don't have to be a good teacher.
And you don't need borders.
Yeah, no borders. Right. The classmates should be from all around the world. And so I don't know why the lag. There's such a lag, right, with media. Yeah. Like TV still gets billions of dollars. We get nothing.
Listen, I'm with you on that, totally. Totally.
So, yeah.
What about NAS Studio? Because one thing you are doing is also empowering people. That's another thing. You're educating and you're empowering. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, look, so my goal in life right now is how can we build the next NAS Daily, which is, I'm assuming, also your goal as well, and everybody's goal. How do you build the next person? And so to do that, I found that the best way to grow somebody as a creator with NAS Studios, the best way to give somebody a chance is to give them de-risk this idea of making videos on the internet. So if you can give somebody like $4,000 for 2 months, right, and just make videos, become a journalist in disguise, right? That'll actually that'll change their life. So if you want to change somebody's life, it doesn't take that much money to be able to change the world.
Now, I can tell you something that's interesting. So I film on this, and it's better quality than the cameras we used to have when I was at the BBC 20, 30 years ago. Yeah?
Yeah.
It's amazing. What's also amazing is how everything changed. My daughter, when she was about 7 or 8 years old, walked up to a cabinet where I keep retro technology. I put it all in there because people don't believe what we've been through. My first laptop was weighed a ton. And she saw a portable typewriter I bought. And I was so proud of this when I got this, that I was working in radio. I got a portable, I can carry it around, portable typewriter. She looked and said, "Dad, that's a keyboard." I said, "Sort of." She said, "Where's the screen?" I said, "The screen was paper." So, but I want to ask you this. So we've got technology in our hands now. We can do almost anything, correct? And you largely have used that.
Pretty much.
Yeah. What happens, though, when it comes to, and I'm going to play the old guy here, what happens to, in terms of validating information, journalism, that, people training people so that they know what's right, what's wrong, that you don't get too much of the fake news out there? How do you work around that?
I mean, it's like, dude, so here's the beauty of living in a place that's not Europe or America, right? It's like, if you look at the past 100 years, what has been the most mainstream news about Kenya, for example? Most mainstream news about Kenya is anytime there's a terrorist attack.
Right.
50 people die in Kenya. 20 people die in Kenya.
If it bleeds, it leads. That was the motto.
If it bleeds, it leads. So actually, you're saying like this new model is going to be bad because fake news, yada, yada. Yeah, maybe, yeah, it has risk. But the old model sucked.
Yeah.
Because the whole world thinks Iraq is still at war. The whole world thinks Kenya is still like in 1950s. And there's a need for new type of journalists. And this is the problem. The incentives don't align. Yeah. The incentives of a journalistic organizations, media organizations, is more views. More views equals more inflammatory. And we're part of that. I'm guilty of that too. Somebody needs to change incentives if you want to change outcomes.
Sarah, more power to you, man.
Thank you, man. Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks.
Thank you guys so much.
Nasar Yassin, he's literally changing the world. And more power to you again. Thank you. So we've got some smart young people in this room, throughout this room, and some smart older people. I won't do that. But we've got now the winners of our essay competition. So I want to invite up the three winners in alphabetical order, please. I've got to invite up Anton Meyer from Toronto University. Come on up, please. Hey, Anton, grab a seat. Yeah. Sophie Nuber from Cambridge University. Come on up. And Brian Tan of Peking University. Come on up as well. So wonderful. We look at the diversity again. I love the way the world is mixing up a little bit now. It's not the old school type of look. So congratulations to all three of you. We do everything blind, by the way, so no one knows gender, no one knows race, no one knows nothing when the judging is being done. I'm going to ask each of our essay winners to stand up and do a little presentation about their subject. I'll leave you just to follow each other, if that's okay, rather than interrupt you, and then we'll start to get some Q&A.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anton Meyer, and I'm from Toronto, Canada. It's a privilege to be speaking at this year's symposium amidst some of the most turbulent times in recent memory. While there are so many factors contributing to the societal divides we're all witnessing, one of the key drivers is the competing priorities between different generations. For older generations, like the silent generation and the baby boomers, their main concerns involve saving for retirement and financial concerns. Conversely, for the younger generations, the most pressing concern is without a doubt climate change. Although the priorities of older and younger generations vary greatly, there is a lever tying together our interests that could help reestablish intergenerational cooperation, and that is public pensions. What's so unique about public pensions is their funding structure. Most pensions rely on the current labor force to fund the pensions of retirees, just as the previous generation did before them. This also increases the power for the current labor force to have a say on the types of investments that the pension fund pursues. What we're missing right now is some sort of global forum for pension funds to align on their divestment goals. What I propose today is the establishment of a global forum to oversee pension funds' divestment from fossil fuel emitting companies and the reinvestment into renewable energies by 2050. This body would be comprised of leading scientists, representatives from the UN Convention on Climate Change, representatives from the UN Youth Delegation, as well as executives from the largest pension funds globally. Their fundamental mandate would be to ensure that all participating pensions achieve net zero emissions by 2050. One of the reasons as well for the longer time frame is so pensions can work with the companies they're invested in to help them actually achieve net zero directly rather than purely divesting. Now, one of the main objectives of this forum is for pensions to align on net zero commitments. What happens too often right now is when one pension fund divests from a carbon-emitting company, another fund reinvests in that same company because they view it to be undervalued. Not only does this fail to address the actual greenhouse gas emissions reductions, but it deters pension funds from engaging in climate-friendly practices in the future. Through the establishment of a global forum, pension funds could align on their collective divestment strategies and build trust, knowing that other funds won't be reinvesting in that same company. Another benefit of establishing a global forum is the knowledge sharing that could occur. Already around the world, we're seeing a number of pension funds announce their plans and strategies to achieve net zero emissions, mostly by 2050. So through this forum, some of the participating pensions and some of the leaders on divestment could help assist other funds and to sort of follow their footsteps. An often underlooked benefit of a global forum would be addressing some of the concerns about greenwashing of assets. Over the past few years, with the growth of ESG, unfortunately, it's become increasingly common for pension funds to misrepresent their divestment plans both to stakeholders as well as to the public at large. Through this global forum, they're established very strict criteria, very clear criteria, so it'd be a lot more tough for pensions to greenwash investors. I know I've spoken about some of the main climate benefits, but it's important to note that there are a number of financial benefits of this as well. We've seen, it's estimated that to reach the Paris Agreement targets, an estimated $50 trillion needs to be mobilized into renewable energy sources. Through the creation of a global forum, this would help provide much of the necessary capital that needs to be mobilized into sustainable investments. Another financial benefit is actually how renewable and sustainable investments have been outperforming traditional carbon-emitting companies. Just last year, in 2021, investments in renewable energy saw 7 times higher returns than investments in oil and gas companies. So as populations age and the size of the current labor force continues to shrink, it's going to become increasingly imperative for pensions to deliver strong and sustainable returns. And one of the ways to do that would be through the creation of this global forum. Although a number of challenges need to be addressed to implement a forum like this, including concerns about short-term returns, I do believe that the creation of a global forum could help reestablish an intergenerational contract. Young people will feel increasingly passionate about contributing to their pensions, while older people can feel more secure about the sustainability of their returns. There will once again be a collective sense of pride in public pensions, serving as a lever to fund sustainable enterprises and act as a catalyst towards energy transition. Thank you.
We live in a world of infinite aspirations and finite resources. The way in which we as society allocate those resources and who has the power to actually determine that allocation poses a problem to environmental preservation. But before I'll go into the details about my suggestion on how to tackle this, I'd like to ask you a few questions. First, imagine being confronted with a choice between giving part of your money to a community in a distant corner of the world or donating it to crime prevention in your hometown. So please raise your hand if you would choose a faraway community over your local one. All right, thank you. And now, imagine being confronted with a choice between consumption today to maximize your utility and forgoing that urge for the benefit of some generations in the future. So again, please raise your hand if you would be if you'd be ready to significantly cut down on your air travel, for example, for the sake of the quality of life on Earth in 100 years' time. Woo, okay. Well, I can see we have some incredibly altruistic people in the audience, which is fantastic. But I'm afraid you might not be representative of the decisions that many other individuals, but also corporations and institutions would make when faced with such dilemmas. And in fact, we, they, and everyone else faces such questions every single day. Facts about the rate and extent of environmental degradation and greenhouse gas emissions over the past century are a proof that humans have been focusing on the here and now with regards to consumption. And this implies an intergenerational tension about the urgency of action. To tackle this problem, I argue that restructuring incentives and aligning them between all stakeholders is the most promising way of achieving collaborative advantage. And by aligning incentives, I mean creating systems and structures that lead individuals' choices in their own self-interest to lead to win-win situations for all parties involved. And in my essay, I showed out on the example of a restructured retirement pension scheme model, which aligns incentives in a way that benefits, well, the pensioners, the younger generation that pay for them directly, the government, and the environment. The retirement pension scheme model is currently the most direct intergenerational agreement that works, which is why I decided to use it to visualize my broader point. And today, the value of pension payout, in very simplistic terms, depends on employment duration, salary, and the risk the job poses to one's health. Such a pension allocation mechanism does not really account for the environmental impact a person has had over their employment. And that is problematic for two key reasons. First, a person working in an environmentally harmful but lucrative industry, for example, an oil company, will receive a higher pension payout than someone working in an environmentally cautious but less lucrative job, for example, an ocean cleaning NGO. And such a pension structure encourages the most lucrative career choices, which to date, broadly speaking, have been positively correlated with negative environmental impacts. And then the second problem is the fact that it's unjust for the younger workers who pay for those pensions directly through their own work. In this case, the employed youth will devote more money to the pension of the oil producer than to that of the NGO worker, even though arguably the oil producer has had a much more negative impact on the environment, which naturally makes the life of the young harder. Now, changing the way pensions are distributed changes the incentives that inform individuals' employment choices and would make pensions less unjust, or the funding of pensions less unjust for the younger workers. And to do that, I propose that the value of the pension payout was not just a function of employment duration, salary, and the risk, but also a function of net greenhouse gas emissions of a given company per capita, adjusted for the seniority of that employee, which here would be proxied by the Gini coefficient. And I have visualized it on the slides, which I can see have disappeared, but if I could get them up, that would be wonderful. And the second one, please. Yeah, perfect. So this is just for visualization purposes. So as tracking technologies continue to improve, net greenhouse gas emissions should really become a fundamental indicator of a company's environmental impact, and also a lens through which management of companies can be assessed and held accountable if necessary. And in my view, such a formula for pension distribution would be fair for the younger generations, but also would make pensions more ecologically equitable. And I think that would be beneficial in a number of ways. So first, it will incentivize people to choose employers who truly mitigate their negative environmental impact. Secondly, in cases where that wouldn't be really possible due to reasons such as skill level or necessity of employment, which of course happens rather often, it would ensure that lower skilled workers or those who have no decision-making power in environmentally hurtful companies would have their pensions adjusted based on their salary and their position. Third, it would put the most financial pressure on the management of companies, incentivizing them to lead systemic change for environmental sustainability. And finally, it would satisfy the younger generations by introducing that element of environmental equity. Now, of course, the counter-argument may be that senior executives perhaps might not rely on pension payouts for their retirement if they have amassed enough wealth to live off capital gains on their investment. Indeed, that might be the case, but that actually strengthens my argument that more incentive alignment and more restructuring of incentives is actually needed to be effective. It has to happen at an individual level, as I have shown in this example, but perhaps even more importantly, at a corporate and institutional level. So for example, to motivate executive management of public companies, financial valuation should take into account net greenhouse gas emissions, and consequently, market capitalization should be adjusted accordingly. And such valuation methodologies seem to be discussed more and more in corporate finance, and I truly believe it's just a matter of time before they become the new norm. And then another example could be, again, setting corporate taxes as a function of net greenhouse gas emissions. So possibilities for aligning incentives are truly endless. I believe that such an approach to fostering collaborative advantage, not just between generations, but between all stakeholders, is the way forward to drive systemic change. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Riz, Anton, Sophie. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I'm Brian from Singapore, and I'm really happy to be here today. So as we have heard from the previous speakers, collaborative advantage can be achieved with the right forms of intergenerational contracts. In the year 1790, a man named Edmund Burke defined it as a partnership not only between those who are living, but also between those who are dead and those who are to be born. Central to this intergenerational contract is the democratic process, through which a people empower a government to deliberate and determine what one would receive or contribute across various life stages. The youth of the past have willingly supported the older generations because they were assured that they would be in turn supported by their younger counterparts when they reached their twilight years. And of course, societal conditions and structural factors change over time. But democracies have been agile. They have been able to receive periodic feedbacks from the electorate, and this renews their mandate to renegotiate existing intergenerational contracts amongst all parties, which in turn maintains intergenerational solidarity. But intergenerational solidarity has already been threatened within the realm of political governance. This is primarily due to demographic transition. With rising life expectancy and falling birth rates, we have seen societies transform from a young one to an aging one. And this demographic transition has profound ramifications for many social economic policies that were previously agreed in previous intergenerational contracts, like the welfare state or like the pension systems, as covered by the previous speakers. So when today's youth were interviewed, when they were surveyed, asking them, do you think you would have a better life than the one your parents had? A majority of respondents in countries like Australia, Belgium, France, Germany, UK, many others, replied, no. The youth's pessimism towards the future can be traced back at its roots to this intergenerational democratic deficit. The representative democracy is the main platform where existing intergenerational contracts can be renegotiated. But owing to this demographic transition, we have seen that the voting powers are concentrated in the hands of the older cohorts. Across most aging populations, the sheer size of the baby boomer cohort means that they are now the dominant cohort in almost all elections. Studies have also shown that age has become the leading predictor of political attitudes, as most voters tend to vote in line with their shared generational experiences. Studies have also shown that governments do not treat every generation equally. Political parties, in fact, tear away the Rawlsian view of ignorance, and they tend to preferentially treat the more dominant cohorts, and in this case, it would be the older cohorts. So this has resulted in many political observers cautioning against the emergence of a parliamentary gerontocracy or even a pensioners' democracy. So the imbalance in the voting cohort would persist in the short to medium term, but there are some policies that perhaps government can adopt to mitigate these issues. And firstly, it would be to improve pre- and post-policy impact assessment. As Lord Bishop noted in the British House of Lords, to solve this problem of intergenerational unfairness, one needs to understand the problem first, but there is simply not enough data to inform us on this issue. More age-disaggregated longitudinal data should be collected, such that more rigorous pre- and post-policy assessments can be conducted, and ideally using varying discount rates for different generations. And secondly, inscribing commitment to pursuing intergenerational fairness would be the best policy, or the best panacea to myopic policy making. And we can perhaps seek inspiration from the Welsh government, where in 2015 they passed the Wellbeing for Future Generations Act, which legally inscribes the importance of sustainable work, not only for the generations living today, but also for the generations living tomorrow. And finally, it is imperative that the youth's voices are heard, especially during the policy-making process. Political parties should pay more attention to their youth branches to amplify the youth voices and groom these leaders in hopes that one day they may take the leap of faith to represent the perspectives of their generations in Parliament. So in conclusion, the younger generations today is already struggling to lead a better life than that enjoyed by their parents. And this intergenerational democratic deficit stacks the odds against them even more. Governments should consider adopting such policies to mitigate this problem in intergenerational political governance, but more importantly, to prevent the unraveling of the democratic process, which we so cherish. Thank you.
So a big thank you to Brian, Sophie, and Anton. Well done on being the three winners. You have to remember, hundreds of essays are entered, and so we're seeing the cream of them here. All of them are excellent, by the way. It's very hard to judge, and I know this being in the judging process, it is a tough one. I'm not going to preempt all the stuff that's to come, but let's talk to our essay winners at this stage. I want to give the first couple of questions to our academic jury members who are with us. Perhaps I could start with Leticia Vargas.
So first of all, congratulations. Great job. So my question, it's about your practical solutions. So it's clear that a new intergenerational contract is urgent, and your arguments, as well as all the other essays' arguments, make it very clear. So there are differences in perceptions about climate change, about democratic participation, and sustainable use of financial capital. And they are taking apart young and older generations. And the solutions you proposed are, they aim to fill this gap, they are practical, and they could be implemented. But for that, they need the commitment and the participation of today's decision makers. And we saw here today a lot of those leaders talking about the actions that they are taking and the responsibility they are taking. So, in your opinion, what is missing for these measurements become real? And what is missing for ideas like yours, practical and feasible, make the heads of the decision makers and the leaders of today? Thank you,
Leticia. Is there anyone in particular you want to put that to? I mean, I can get all three to answer, but anyone in particular first?
No, I think all the essays, they bring these practical and implementable solutions, so it's for all of the three.
Let's get a brief response. Perhaps, Anton, you could start.
For sure, yeah. Thank you so much for the question. I think one of the big challenges right now that we're seeing is just a lack of trust between decision makers. I think it's really tough for a lot of decision makers to be the first one to make that change, and fear as well just about the potential repercussions. And I think certainly the topic of my essay, looking at that global forum, one of the main goals of that is to really build trust between decision makers and really let them know that they're all kind of going to be in a sort of alignment such that when they're making decisions, they know that the other people are committed to that as well. Thanks.
Okay. Sophie?
Thank you for the question. Yes, so from my perspective, changing a status quo is always very difficult, especially if some ideas may be radical, and I appreciate that mine might seem radical at first. But these starting points of really raising awareness and starting the discussions, I think, are incredibly important. And yesterday already was a very fruitful day in that regard, because thanks to the other leaders of tomorrow, we have come up with, well, next steps for this model and what other variables could be added, what things would have to be considered in order to make sure that it would really benefit all stakeholders. And conversations are the first step. And then I think, as Anton mentioned, building that trust and finding people who become your cheerleaders to then take that forward through the more established routes, I think, is the next thing to look forward to.
All right. Brian, your thought?
Right. Thank you for your question. I think in the case of my essay, in democracies, governments essentially live from elections to elections. And I think at the end of the day, it boils down to whether there is a political incentive for the government to be pursuing such policies that will maximize their chances of winning the next election. So there's probably two ways to do so. One way would be for the government to be, cognizant of the importance of sustainability, and long-term planning rather than being focused on myopic short-term gains. That, of course, would take a lot of political, capital to do so, and it will probably be more possible in countries where the government has already won the trust of the people and able to make such sacrifices for the benefit of the people in the long run. I think the other way would be for the younger generations to make their voices heard. And when our voices are heard loud enough, to the extent that the government cannot ignore us, then the calculus on their end would be shifted as well. So I think that would be my case. Thank you.
We also have one other academic jury member with us, so I'm going to give the opportunity. It's Tanmay Tana.
Thank you. Congratulations to all three of you. I must say your essays were very well written. But I did find that they were very global north-centric. So I can address the question primarily to Anton and Sophie, but it also applies to Brian. So on the pension issue, for example, I come from a country, India, where we don't have a unified public pension system. So it's not really applicable to my country and to most countries in the global south. According to the ILO, the International Labor Organization, more than 50% of the people globally don't have access to public pension. In contrast to this, most of the economic growth, as well as most of the growth in emissions over the next several decades, is expected to come from these very countries in the global south. So how do you propose to make your solutions more applicable also to the global south?
Tanmay, thank you. I'm going to ask Sophie, does that really mess with your equation?
Not at all, not at all. And thank you so much for raising that, because it's a very important point, and we have also discussed that at length yesterday. That's absolutely true. And on one hand, yes, there are many countries that don't actually have a public pension scheme. On the other, if we look at the developing countries specifically, if I'm correct, between 22 up to 40% of the labor force is actually employed in informal employment, which poses another problem to the public pension scheme. I have used the pension scheme model as an example of restructuring incentives. This is not my key, it is part of my key message, but my key message is really that we should think about how to restructure incentives. But of course, yes, I think with regards to, what are the estimated, emissions in the next 50 years from India, for example, or other countries in the global south, one thing to keep in mind, I think, as well, is that we shouldn't be putting the burden on just individuals, because if you look at the statistics, it's actually, corporates that, and institutions that actually, are responsible for the majority of the emissions. And so I think subsidies for clean energy and more institutional change would perhaps be the answer to contexts where pension schemes wouldn't really be applicable in that way.
Thank you, Sophie. And Anton, that's a very valid point, though, about the fact that this is quite a Western-centric perspective, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point. And I think it's important to consider that this proposed forum is really a first step and by no means a final step. I think when we look at some of the challenges, just addressing climate change and looking at it from a financing perspective, there's certainly challenges with other sorts of funds as well, private equity funds, mutual funds, which so far have been more reluctant to make that change. And so I think really when I proposed this forum, the idea was for this to be really a first step, and for it to include a number of stakeholders who represent very different regions and who come from different identities. So I think when we're looking at some of the youth representation, this is where it becomes absolutely critical to have representation from minority communities, from indigenous communities, from those who are going to feel the impacts most of climate change, even if they aren't the ones contributing to it. So that was the idea behind as much diversity as possible in the selection of the people on the forum.
Thanks very much, Anton. Brian, what do you think?
Right, so maybe I'll recontextualize the question slightly to be more applicable in my case. I think the essay that I wrote, essentially what I presented was in very general terms. But I think it's important to be cognizant of the fact that countries are, of course, at different stages of their development, and they will be prioritizing different things at different points in time. I think it reminds me of the environmental Kuznets curve, right? An inverted U-shaped curve, which posits a relationship between GDP growth and GDP per capita, as well as perhaps an extent of environmental degradation. And Kuznets, rather this adaptation of the Kuznets curve argues that what it requires a country to reach a certain level of economic development before they start to take a look at environment. But of course, I mean that is not necessarily true now, because we know that this is really important in the present, not so much in the future as well. So I think yes, we must understand that some democracies might be prioritizing different issues, perhaps economic development, but I don't think we should let the conversation stop there. And in fact, other countries should also engage these developing countries to perhaps help them, take that jump forward, that leap forward, to also continue, to think about the future as well as they grapple with the issues that are most pressing in the present.
Thank you very much. Well, ladies and gents, we'd like you to also have the chance to ask our winners questions. So please, we've got a few minutes, maybe 10, 15 minutes, where we can, if you put up your hand, we'll get a microphone to you. Tell us where you're from and your affiliation, please, if you could.
Thanks. I'm Urs from Switzerland. I'm affiliated with the University of St. Gallen in various manners. I have a question to Brian. Thank you very much. The point about intergenerational justice, at least what I see in Switzerland, we have public votes like every 2 weeks. And everybody can vote every 2 weeks on certain subject matters. What we notice is that the younger generation doesn't go to vote. So, and the older one doesn't go to vote either. So, but like the average voting is about 30%. So if 100% of the younger generation would go to vote and 30% of the older generation would go to vote, the younger generation would always win over. So there is a chance to win over, to do the revolution, as the Swiss president said, from the younger generation. But how, Brian, do you mobilize your generation to stand up and go and vote 100% and not only 30%? That's my question.
Good point. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I mean, I think if there were a situation where 30% of the older generation vote and 100% of the younger generation vote, then I think that would also be a problem in itself, right? Because we are not going to be representing everybody that we want to, that essentially we should let most of the voices be heard rather than a disproportionate figure. I would imagine that, okay, firstly, I think to your point, studies have shown that despite the imbalance in eligible number of voters, in fact, as you rightly pointed out, the older generations tend to go to the polls more often than the younger generations. And this means that the difference, the disparity in the number of votes become even larger during the actual vote counts. And that is a big issue. I think one reason why young voters, eligible voters, may not be going to the polls would be they already sense a feeling of disillusionment because they feel that the system does not listen to them, they feel that their voices are not heard, and that even if they cast their vote, it will not translate to any real policy implication that would beneficially impact them. So I think the youth must, of course, try their best to vote, right? But I think this probably would have to start from both ground up and bottom up. Sorry, ground up and top down, where the government must also take the lead, to ensure that they prove that if you vote, you will see some changes. And I think this morning we heard from the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, talking about how there's a youth council. I believe one of the speakers mentioned, right? And how there is a political commitment there, to truly ensure that the youth voices are heard, and that would translate to real policy impact. And I think if these systems are in place, it will interest the youth more into politics. They will see that there is a reason why they are given this sacred right to vote, and they will cherish this opportunity to do so.
Thank you, Brian. Actually, and I'm going to put it to Sophie and to Anton as well. The thing is that we're sitting in a kind of very privileged environment here, and of course, well-educated people, so maybe this is taken differently with a different audience. But what's your view on this, that a lot of young people don't feel that there's any, the point Brian made, young people don't feel they're necessarily empowered to make any decision-making changes, and hence they stay away from voting?
Mm-hmm. Well, to build on Brian's point, when I was preparing for my essay and just doing the research as part of my degree in Cambridge, I came across a very interesting study that actually looked into the intergenerational conflict of interest with regards to climate change in the UK and found no conflict, which was one of the maybe not surprising but intriguing finding. And then another point that came out through that nationwide questionnaire is that despite there being no differing views on the necessary actions for climate change, that actually the older generations felt like they can still do more to fight it in contrast to the younger ones. So building on Brian's point, I think that feeling of disillusionment with the system and with the institutions is definitely present. And I think answering the question, perhaps might be one of the key reasons why people still don't take up that voice, despite it being given to them. And I absolutely don't agree with that, and would want to use my voice to encourage that. But again, I understand I'm sitting in a privileged seat where I might understand, the value of that or have been given that voice.
Anton?
Thank you.
For sure. Yeah, I totally agree both with Brian and Sophie. I think a lot of it can be attributed to disenfranchisement and a lot of young people who have seen the same decisions made over and over and who feel as though they don't really have a voice and they don't have an input. So certainly I think sitting on this stage, having a voice and an input, recognizing for me that that's not the case for so many people. And I think we have seen cases where there have been elections with higher youth participation, and I think there are cases where young people believe. But I think the key to getting younger people to vote more is really to get them to believe ultimately that change is possible.
All right, thank you. We'd like to get a microphone to Aditya there. If you just put your hand up so we can see you. I don't know who's got just the one microphone, or is there two? Oh, there's another one. Thank you.
Thanks, Riz. Hi, I'm Aditya Ghosh. I'm one of the jury members, have been one of the jury members for a few years now. And I wear a tie only because I'm not naturally as handsome as Riz. So
he wants to be wrapping around my face, I'm sure.
So the question really, actually, and Nusser kind of raised it, and I'm someone who kind of deeply believes that communication will be extremely important as generations come together. My question to the three of you, as I read your essays and, of course, many of the other brilliant essays that came up, how do we make words, language, ideas more simple and lucid for people to understand? Because not only does it create a generational divide, it also creates a divide between the haves and the have-nots, between the anywheres and the somewheres, and so on and so forth. And what I've seen in emerging markets is that many pockets of society who otherwise would have been left outside the room, outside the halls, outside the conference rooms, after a while will just take things in their own hands and say, I don't really care about what you're saying to me anymore. And therefore, leaders like you, like tomorrow, and many of the other hundreds of leaders here, how do you make yourself and your ideas more relatable to the people who are actually going to be voting and people who are going to be impacted by those ideas?
Very valid point. Perhaps, Anton, I can start with you.
For sure. Yeah, it's a fantastic point. Not to steal your thunder, but I do think it is important to have more simple communication. And I think we have seen that through the rise of forums like Twitter, where it's really short and concise information. I think now more than ever, there's access to information. I think one of the main issues right now that we're seeing is the validity of that information. There's a huge problem with disinformation. And I think what we need to find as we work towards this medium is ensuring that there's communication and information available to everyone, but making sure that the information they're consuming is accurate. So whether that's various forms of regulation, and just a sort of general building of trust among the people who are accessing these sites. I think that's what we need moving forward because, yeah, as you noted, the forms of communication are totally changing, I think in many ways for the positive, but one issue with that is the validity of the information.
And Sophie, there is a tendency, isn't there, to want to sound well-informed with the kind of language that makes, those who use that kind of language feel you're connecting, but there is a mass that doesn't.
Of course. Yeah, thank you for raising that. I think as much as communication is important and is, of course, the way in which we convey the messages, I think it goes deeper than that. It's also about what people represent and the experiences they have had. And I think that is really the underlying value of the end product, which is the communication. Because if we look at politicians, for example, and me being Polish myself, having gone through quite a populist government, and then living in the UK when Brexit happened, and then, of course, seeing French elections, which turned out, as at least I hoped, but it wasn't very clear, and the era of Trump. I think this certainly all came from the fact that people have been disillusioned with the quote-unquote elites and maybe the lack of communication between certain groups. So as much as the way of communicating is important, I still think it's also very important to just keep grounded and actually find a common language. It might go beyond really the spoken language, with all groups and communities and cultures. So I think that's another important thing to keep in mind.
Brian, on this thought, do you think that simplifying the language too much might make it feel like the idea has lost its validity?
Right. I think this is a really important question in public policy, or in terms of, governments can come up with the best policies, right? But if they are unable to communicate the value of it and how it benefits the citizens, there would be a rift between the government and the voters, right? So I think it's really important to ensure that the information is accessible. It could be in terms of different languages. I think Nas, to build on a point Nas mentioned earlier, the younger generations and the older generations, sometimes they speak different languages, and it's true of my society when I grew up in, right? So I'm from Singapore, and the older generations, they speak dialects, right? Like Hokkien, Cantonese, Teochew, right? But the younger generations may not necessarily know how to speak these dialects, and is, for instance, during the COVID crisis, if I could just cite a little example to illustrate how I think it's a good way of doing it. The government, issued, rather disseminated videos of the benefits of vaccinations, not in English or Chinese, but in dialects, right, in Hokkien, Teochew, and Cantonese, in order to reach out to these older generations to educate them on it. And I think this is a really striking example to me as the value of communication, and to ensure that very complex information, scientific, information about how important or beneficial the vaccine is, that may be otherwise really incomprehensible in English to someone who may not be very proficient in the language, right? To have the information delivered to them at their doorstep in a language that they are used to and that they are most comfortable in, I think that makes a big difference in demystifying such public policies.
And this is interesting. When I was studying journalism way back when, there was something I discovered called the fog index. And the fog index was used to measure the clarity of a message, the clarity of writing. It was the number of syllables in a word, the number of words in a sentence, the number of sentences in a paragraph. And by adding all these up, the fog index would give an idea of how easy something was to understand and read. And in Britain at the time, The Sun, the tabloid newspaper, had the lowest fog index. And the FT, the Financial Times, had the highest fog index. And the biggest readership was The Sun. And of course, the FT was a very specialized area. So I really related very much with what Nosara was saying about the need to simplify, because I came from a science background, medical physiology, where I had words like attenuate, potentiate, augment as part of my vocabulary, and I had to simplify it to communicate to a wider audience. But Nosara's taken it to another level, obviously, and connects with a lot of people through that. So I want to actually get you the chance to ask a question, and perhaps even think about how the kind of messages that the R3 essay winners are trying to get across to a broader audience might be done through a mechanism such as you've created. Maybe you have to get your microphone, actually, I think. Sorry.
Actually, I'm more interested in knowing what next. After you go back home, you got the award, you got the certificate, what next? Like, what is an actionable way in which you can influence 1,000 people with those 3 ideas? Have you given that some thought?
Ryan, let's start with you.
And have you tried TikTok?
You don't have to dance while you do it. Brian, you start on this one.
Well, to answer the second question, which is the easier question, no, I have not tried TikTok, but perhaps I should give it a shot. I think for your first question, in terms of what's future, actions, I think personally for me, I think it would start from my own community, right, my own social circle, to spread the message, to educate my friends and let them educate me in terms of what's important, as well as to continue to speak to people that may not necessarily share the same opinion with me. That could be people of the same age or of different ages, as we've been doing here over the last few days and tomorrow as well. Yeah, and I think in terms of scalable solutions, I think institutions are already in place in my society, and I think it would be worth a go trying to explore these relevant societies and organizations and see what I can do with them.
All right, Sophie?
Yes, I have given it a bit of thought, and actually that's why yesterday's discussion session was so important, because it has really given me ideas about how to develop it further and to see the potential downfalls, but also benefits of that idea. I have one more month to go with my master thesis, but I have already spoken to the Cambridge community to publish an extended paper about that in the Cambridge newspaper, and then also with some journalists in Poland, because in the end, that would probably be my first step, by just to test that idea. So yeah, that would be the first thing to do. But then, as you say, well, as I mentioned before, also just about continuing that conversation and really getting more and more feedback from different groups to see what the different views are and how it can be emergent further.
And Anton, you have to stand up and dance this in portrait mode.
No, I think that's a really good question. And I think in terms of a global forum, probably something that's harder in the short term to create. But I do think, you know, in my home country of Canada, I know doing the research, a lot of public pensions in Canada have already taken those steps. And so really kind of when I go home, whether it's through direct communication with them, you know, maybe even pushing some of them to be leaders, creating a forum like this. I think certainly the Canada Pension Plan, OMERS, and a number of large pensions have already committed to this. And I think what we need now, what we need next, is alignment at a more global scale. And then, yeah, I guess to your second question, maybe creating a TikTok. I don't have one, and maybe pushing those ideas through TikTok. Yeah.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, when we said we were going to put our 3 essay winners, you know, turn the heat on, I forgot how hot it gets under these lights. I was actually pale and blonde when I walked up, in case you hadn't noticed. So I'm going to, at this stage now, invite up, oh, by the way, please, a round of applause for them as we end the Q&A. To get the final verdicts and to give you a little bit more information about what the process was, I'm going to invite up the president of the award jury, Professor Georg von Kroon, and the president of the academic jury, sorry, Professor Heike Bruch.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you. Please raise. So, Heike, it's great to be back, right? It's fantastic after such a long pandemic and being isolated in your sort of home office. This is just fantastic. And I look at the audience and I see so many energetic and so many happy faces. I look at these fantastic winners and I'm so impressed. I'm deeply impressed, not only by kind of the straightness of your messages, but also the passion that you actually bring into the messages. So that's just fabulous. Just a couple of words about this competition, this essay competition that we have at hand. The competition was started in 1989, and it's the largest essay competition for students on the planet. This year, we received 400 essays. That's a little bit less than we typically get. We tend to get around sort of 9 or 800 to 1,000 essays, but 400 essays from 75 countries. But the really fantastic news about the essay competition this year is that of the top 100 authors, 55 are women. So also a big applause for that. Actually, it's very first time in history. And if I can give a message to all potential essayists, get in there and just write your essay. We love to read them. They're really fantastic. And also having diversity in the group, also from different countries, like 75 countries, different disciplines, academic disciplines, is absolutely imperative to this particular contest. Now, how does the essay contest work? It's a fairly complicated process, you see. So the 400 essays are being sent into the competition, and then they're undergoing what is called a double-blind review. And that means that we don't know who the authors are, and the authors don't know who the reviewers are. That's a double-blind process. First, the essays go to the academic jury, which is led by Heike, and consists of about 40 doctoral students from University of St. Gallen and ETH Zurich. Now, they select 100 of the best authors, and out of these 100, they again select 25 semi-finalists. And out of those, they select 6 to 10 essays to pass on to the award jury, which I'm chairing, basically. And these essays that we get to see, they're really creme de la creme. They're really fantastic. What we do when we look at the essays is to look at writing. You know, is the writing clear? Is it lucid? Is it well formulated? The argumentations and whether or not the solution proposed is practical. And in all these essays, I can truly say that that was the case. Would you like to share some impressions from, you know, the work in the academic jury and as well the main jury?
Yeah, as you mentioned, I'm involved in the academic jury as president, and you said it's led by me, which is nice but not correct. Officially, yes, but actually it's led by the St. Gallen Symposium team, and this year in person by Fabio Heini and Yannick Miller. They coordinate.
Yeah.
sure. That one, and acquiring 42 academic jury members, which are very busy doctoral students from both our universities and even some postdocs, and managing this process. It's always a lot of work, but in these times, even more work. So later they selected the 10 crème de la crème papers, and in the award jury, that was special. It's always interesting, but this time there was a special energy because the jury members were all convinced this topic is a tricky one, is a difficult one, and at the same time urgently needed. So there was this special engagement. Then what was also remarkable, there was this more agreement than in the past. I don't know whether it was, Georg, that you were not there. I don't know. I don't think so. This time, somehow, more agreement that on the paper, selecting the right ones, that we really picked the 3 best papers, and there was more agreement among the very different jury members here, although the papers were very different in their strengths. One did a really impressive analysis of the problem, that we really have a challenging problem here. The other one made an impressive discussion while other solutions failed. It really gave a fantastic overview here. And the third one had a very tangible solution, almost an implementation plan. But they had all one thing in common. All of them had fresh ideas that can really make a difference. And in the writing, Georg, you mentioned we always consider the writing. We really sense that each of the person, although it's a relatively short text, is emotionally involved and really wants to make a difference. And it's leaders of tomorrow. And I sensed it's that you want to take leadership today. And Sophia, I spoke with all of you, but she said, I'm here to find people who make this happen together with me. So that I sense that from the others as well. So that was in the paper, and more impressive to see that on stage, that you want to make a difference with those ideas.
Yeah, definitely. So thanks a lot, Heike. This takes us to the next phase. And if I may, the minister actually welcomed me to use her first name, Grace. I welcome you on stage. And perhaps you would like to share also some of your impressions.
First of all, I think this must be one of the highlights of the symposium. It's my first time here, but what I've just seen and heard just blew my mind away. And I must confess there's some dissonance because the phrases and the usefulness, it just doesn't match with what I've heard and read. And I was expecting, after Nursia's point about looking and seeing emojis on screen, but no, they were so thoughtful. The quality of analysis and the fact that they're able to be here answering the very difficult questions that were thrown at them with confidence and with clarity of their minds, I think they really deserve our congratulations. And
So, as Heike mentioned, the award jury had a very tough time. We had to select 3 winners, and we had to rank the winners, and we also had to decide on the prize money, and so on. And before we get to this sort of Hollywood-like, kind of Oscar part of the award ceremony, I'd just like to thank all the people involved in this. I'd like to thank the 3 of you. I'd like to thank all the essays to contribute to their essays. I'd like to thank the members of the academic jury, the members of the main jury, as well as also the team of Yannick Miller and the symposium that always make sure that this particular very complex competition actually can run so very smoothly. So a big applause, and also the minister for actually taking the guys. Okay. Without further ado, Are you excited? It is very exciting. In the past, we had drum rolls, but we actually couldn't get the drum player. So I have to see, perhaps I have my wrong glasses on or something. No. The third place goes to Mr. Brian Tan.
Congratulations. So proud of you. Well done. Congratulations.
Then the runner-up. Have to see. Are you excited? Okay. The runner-up is Mr. Anton Meyer.
Congratulations. Most impressive.
And that means, ladies and gentlemen,
congratulations.
That means at ETH Zurich, where I'm a professor, you have to kind of understand numbers. So that, I guess that actually means that Miss Sophie Neubauer is the first place winner of this year.
So impressive. Congratulations. So we take a picture together?
Yeah. There is a picture. So I think now, yes.